instead, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. Now listen, the struggle was not grand. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the AZAPO Online Political Education discussion platform. This is Sunday, the 16th of May, 2021. My name is Simpuya Ashe, and today I am hosting veteran journalists in Comrade Khathu Mamaila, who needs no introduction to this platform. He has had occasion to have discussions with us on a number of discussion topics at previous webinars that we hosted, and today he will be sharing the platform with Mpumelelo Mkhabela, another veteran journalist who needs no introduction to this country. He is well known and has written much in the newspapers of this country, especially the prominent newspapers, and he will be joining us shortly. And the discussion for today is really about our country. We are looking at South African democracy, and there is belief that South African democracy is at the crossroads. So we are in for an interesting analysis and some perspectives from these two veteran journalists who would be unpacking this topic for us today. Welcome to this platform, Comrade Khathu Mamaila.
Thank you, Comrade Simpiwe, and I hope we'll have a fruitful and engaging discussion.
Yeah, I'm also hoping for a fruitful and engaging discussion. As I indicated, we are still waiting for Mpumelelo Mkhabela to join us, and he should be joining us shortly. And we are really going to be unpacking the state of our country and looking at a number of aspects and areas of the state of our country. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. And maybe I should kick off, with your views and perspectives on what I call the state of the nation. What is the pulse of the nation? What is the state of the nation right now, Comrade Khathu? And we'll carry on with you until Mpumi joins us and is having some tech issues, and he should be joining shortly.
Thank you. It's quite a difficult one. When you say what is the pulse, it's like the pulse is too difficult to detect. It's like I think we are in our probably facing a very difficult period as a country. I mean, there's COVID that has decimated jobs in the hospitality industries in all over, with small firms closing down, people losing their jobs. Those who are lucky enough are told to take salary cuts of up to 50%. And then you move away from that, you look at our politics. Currently, you have the labor trade union movement basically at loggerheads with government. They are trying to get government to honor an agreement that was secured 3 years ago in relation to salary adjustments. Rightly so, they want salaries to be adjusted as per the agreement. The government is arguing that given the state of the economy, at best they can keep the salaries at where they are, which basically taking it, because if you factor in inflation, it means that people are earning less than what they were earning before. And then you look at what's happening within the governing party. Quite scary developments. Basically, the organization appears to be imploding. And we probably the coming few weeks will decide as to whether it is imploding or it is getting rid of some of the people that are senior within the organization. So it depends where you want us to start, but if we were to say the state of the country, I think it's quite, in a nutshell, we are not in a good space as a people. If you look at all indicators, whether it's education, the state of health, can you imagine a hospital like Joburg Gen? It's called Charlotte Maclecky for those who have given it a new name. But Joburg Gen closing down because it burned down. And when you ask why it burned down, some fire hydrant were not working. It's just such a big institution. In the midst of COVID, you have to close down Charlotte Maclecky Hospital because of a fire that burned down. It's a fire that started there. And then you look at the state of our roads. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was driving from Newcastle on Friday, and he was advised to take another route, longer route, because the road that was supposed to be using has got so many potholes that if you were to drive during the night, he's guaranteed to get potholes. And it's almost like what you find everywhere. I mean, there was a story that I saw sometimes last week of two kids who died at a school because they were trying to kill a snake at a school. You can imagine you send kids to school and then they don't come back because there are snakes, because there's no infrastructure. We don't have proper schools for our children. Kids have to still walk many kilometers to school. And and the sad part is that we're more concerned about dynamics in political parties and failing to focus on the things that matter, creating employment opportunities, reducing inequality in our country, fighting poverty. Those key priorities have taken a backseat because the focus is really on the political aristocracy and how they are sharing the cake among themselves.
And it's quite interesting that you mentioned what is happening in the public life of people. And, if you were to track back, just before, 1994 gave us this democracy, there was a lot of excitement and, about the fact that at last, Black people are going to determine their own destiny and we are no longer dependent on, the favors from, the white tribe that was governing the country at the time. And, quite interestingly, at that time, you travel in any of the Bantustans, the quality of the roads, the quality of the education institutions, and the quality of hospitals that you were to go to, you travel, to some of these areas. You also found, teachers' colleges that were opened, nursing colleges that were open and operational and everything. And all of that has disintegrated. We don't seem to have any reference of something worth that can be pointed to as an achievement by this democracy. 27 years since that time. What can we put that to? In a sense, what what is it that we can say, this democracy has given, not to the country, but to Black people in particular, because these are the people who have, sweated and, bled for the democracy that we now have. And others died for it. And what can we point to as, something that has been achieved by this democracy?
It's actually very depressing because somebody like myself and somebody like yourself, we never thought there'll be a need to try to compare what used to be before 94 and post 94. I mean, we thought, yeah, it's actually like a heresy to actually compare the two. But you can't not compare when, I grew up part of my life in Soweto. I used to stay in Diepkloof. I used to walk to Orlando Station to catch a train to go to town because it was cheaper to go to town in a train. Now there are no trains running from Soweto to town. Part of the railway has been stolen. And so people who used to spend very little money to go to work on using trains, now they have to queue for long hours on taxis, paying up to 10 times or even more on transport. And they spend a lot of their earnings on transport. And you just look at the state of decay. To some extent, I think we're witnessing what a lot of post-colonial Africa faces. Once you have the party that wins the first election after the dawn of democracy tends to be very strong and powerful, and as a result, as time goes on, it tends to be a bit insensitive to the needs of and aspirations of the majority of people. Partly because there is no incentive to really be responsive to the needs of the majority of people, because you are assured of victory. And one of the reasons that I think people go to an extent of wanting to be in the leadership of the ruling party, for example, is because they know that once you are in that leadership, de facto you are government. And so in some twisted way, maybe the developments within the governing party, which could, some people say could result in a split. If that split were to happen, maybe, just maybe, it might be a better thing for South Africa. Sounds cruel if you are a member of the ANC, but anybody who's sincere about the interests of the country should look at this thing a bit with a different eye, to say, Tata Mangana used to say that obesity is fatal. That if you can, if you're too big, if you are too obese, it's not good for you. So the obesity of the governing party is not good for the country. So if maybe, because clearly parties that got out of the ANC, starting with the PAC, later with the UDM, later with the COPE, later with EFF, did not really succeed to change the political fortunes of the ANC. But perhaps if the ANC was to split almost into two, you might have a situation where there's a bit more agency in terms of making sure that you don't lose power. And maybe by that, the governing party might be a bit more responsive to the needs of the majority of people. I mean, when you look at various reports, there was a report by State SA a few weeks ago that says young people, I think aged between 20 and 34 or so, have got are less skilled than their parents. So you're sitting in a country, you can see that, I mean, that's you are going backwards. So instead of us saying we're going to exploit the resources of the country, we're going to compete globally, we're actually regressing. And that is a big problem. I mean, for example, when you look at one of the things that people are looking at, if you just take the issue of the wage dispute between trade unions and the government. The big focus, of course, is about salary adjustment. But the thing that people are not talking about is that given the state of the economy and how things are not working well. I mean, you look at unemployment hovering around 40%, and some people are saying that even the policies that government is pursuing of saving money, it's not really helpful because there are up to 500,000 jobs locked in government, posts that are not filled because government is saving money. And some people argue that probably that's not the best way of getting out of this ditch, because if you were to actually fill those positions and you got more people working, and when you have got more people working, they've got more disposable income, they're able to buy things, then you stimulate the economy on the demand side. And as people are able to spend more money on buying new things like appliances, groceries, and then creating more employment in the process. Because the situation as it is, it's like somehow we think that by saving, we can get out of this problem. But I think, in brief, I think we are just being misgoverned. And so you can see that there is no focus. I mean, if you just take the government adopted the National Development Plan a few years ago. It's supposed to be, it's called Vision 2030. It's a document, beautiful document, endorsed by all political parties, essentially in parliament. But if you just look at that, what of that has happened? Very little. We don't even talk about it anymore. In fact, if you look at newspapers, it's more about this faction trying to weaken that other faction. And we're fighting for crumbs. Even if you look at the things that we are fighting over as Black people, it's very little things that we're fighting over. If you were to get something, we will ask, how did you get that one? Because we're not looking at broadening and building and broadening the economy, making the cake bigger so that more of our people can benefit. And I just find that it's quite depressing. You can go on and on, but when you look, even when you try to be positive, you ask yourself as to whether you are not being ignorant by just trying to find positive, where everywhere you look, it's like we're sitting on a time bomb. And that's what scares me the most, that you can't have stability in a country where half the nation is unemployed. And even those who are employed are underemployed. I mean, more than 50% of the people who work in South Africa earn less than 5,000 rand a month. And you can then ask yourself, what are they able to do with that kind of money? There's an argument that many of them actually work to go to work. They spend more than 6% of their transport places to buy food. You can't call that employment.
No, I think the biggest issue is, as you put it, people living to work instead of working to live, and that has been the nature of our lives since the times of apartheid, and we were really hoping that once we get into the democratic dispensation, we would have a significant change in our livelihoods and how we live our lives. And I think the scarier part of it is the fact that Black people will lose all confidence in Black people's ability to govern, to a point where they begin to believe it was better at under the pharaohs. So let's rather go back to the pharaohs, whom we were despising for the manner in which they ruled over us. So that is likely to happen in the march of time, because people do lose confidence once they don't see the fruits of their labor, and they don't see you governing in the manner that is expected. I do want us to progress a bit further. You earlier on spoke about the labor strike in the public sector, and it's quite interesting that COSATU and all the unions in the bargaining council had put a demand to government 7% increase. And as you aptly put it, for the last 3 years, there hasn't been any increase in the public sector wage bill. And government is saying no, another zero increase. Let's continue for the next 3 years without an increase. And there's been suggestions from some economists that maybe some kind of a payment holiday from the government GEPF, Employee Pension Fund, would help the situation with regards to the impasse. What is your view on this? Because you see, what has been happening is that if you look at the past 3 years, for instance, or not even the past 3 years, if you look at the past 2 years, government has taken about 300 billion rand from the wage bill, because they didn't increase people's salaries, and instead they use that money to fund other programs. And it would be something if we were to be able to say these are the programs that government funded with that 300 billion rand that they saved. Now we can't even point to those, and others are arguing, we are suffering, grossly from this austerity. Why don't we just take the country out of this austerity? Because if you look at what is happening elsewhere in the world, governments, more especially in developing economies, are pumping money into their own countries, and yet we are taking money away from our own economy. And Tito Mboweni has been arguing about a bloated public sector, yet we are complaining about the quality of services and the inability of the bloated public sector to service, the country. So it just doesn't make sense. I don't know what you make of all of this.
So, the tragedy of the the tension happening within the governing party is that the various factions do not have ideological differences. No, it's more about a fight for resources more than anything else. So it will probably enhance the governing party if within there was a stronger alternative voices about how we need to look at things as government. I mean, you see, each time, for example, if you were to say, let's strengthen government involvement in the economy, you will get a ready-made answer that, but government can't do anything. Look what they've done to ESCOM, SABC, DNL, SAA. With good reason, they'll tell you how those things were mismanaged. But you see, the problem is that as a society or as a country, we have almost conditioned ourselves that we can't think beyond the ANC government. So whatever solutions that you put on the table, you see them through the lens of saying, but can the governing party be able to deliver or to use these facilities? I mean, one of the argument that people make is that when you say, let's have a state bank, for example, we will say, if these people can't run something like the SABC, what do you think they'll be able to run a state bank? What do you think they'll be able to run a mining company? So everything that seems to be like an alternative is then vilified because you're saying, yeah. So and it's a very weekend argument because basically you're saying person A is incapable of doing something. Therefore, the entire theory around that thing doesn't hold. Yeah. And so going back to the point that you're making, over a long period now, we've been really being prisoners of this liberal economic theory, getting all sorts of praises from your World Bank that we are running the economy very well. But I think we should begin to be more worried about what is the impact of that well running of the economy on our people. We get more concerned that we're getting a downgrade from some rating agency, but because I think our test must be saying, are we responding to the majority of our people? So the problem is that this voice that is going to say, but why should we continue to be saying, save money, don't employ people, and forgetting that this economy is supposed to serve the majority of people who vote the ruling party into power. So if you can't address the aspirations of those people, you are actually not delivering to them. And but because there is no counter voice, I mean, the governing party is such a difficult position. Their main opposition party is a party that looks after capital, that looks after white interests. So in almost 3 decades after coming to power, you still have to explain and argue in court why you must implement affirmative action. And sometimes you get these reactionary Afrikaner groups taking you to court on affirmative action and winning in court.
Yeah.
On affirmative action.
It's quite interesting that you say.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting that you say the main opposition party is looking after white interests, and one may argue even the governing party is looking after white interests, and therefore this country doesn't have.
That's the point that one is making. That because they're trying to render the opposition irrelevant, so they must also address those fears of the white minority. So when you see it, that's why you hear people speak in folk tongues instead of talking clearly about things. They say, but we should not just be concerned about black people alone. We are a non-racial country. We must look after. Hey, for a moment, let's just talk about the majority, or not even the majority. Let's talk about black people, because ultimately, whether we are making progress in this project of transforming society, the litmus test really will be on how we've been able to move black people out of poverty and giving meaning to the fact that every 5 years they queue and go and vote. So the problem is that when you don't have a counterbalance, it would have been probably better if you had a stronger Pan-Africanist Congress and AZAPO as the main opposition to the ANC, because then they'll be more responsive, I would imagine, to the needs of the majority. Yeah. Because if you look even at how the EFF came into being, and they raised this thing of expropriation of land without compensation. And because of that, the ANC had to respond and come up with some similar slogan. I actually don't think that they believe in that thing, but for now, it's strategic to actually say, let's look at the constitution, because you don't actually even have to amend the constitution to give land to black people. You don't. There are so many mechanisms for you to do that. But when you look at the inability to deliver to black people, it's because sometimes I just think that there is no incentive, because if they don't, what happens to them? Do they lose election? No. So why should they bother that they should actually be so worried and move quickly? And so that's what I'm saying. Maybe, just maybe, if they were to split and you have 2 serious organs, even if they were to win an election by, say, 51%, that should be sufficient to say, if we are not careful, we might lose. Because you see, the decay of politics in Zimbabwe happened with ZANU winning elections with up to 80%. If you look at some of the African countries, people go to elections and then people are returned to power with 97%. So when you have that, you have a recipe for non-performance. And democracy, I mean, there are very few countries where unless we are in a communist setup, and even then, you have to have good people with a moral conscience, like Fidel Castro. The guy, when he took over, the first farm that he nationalized was his father's farm. You can see that for him, he did not get into politics to amass resources. He got there to serve. But in an era where, at the table, many of us are trying to actually feather our own nests, you must just try to build systems that are going to try to make it more difficult for people to steal. Because without that, even if you look at the ANC way, whether you look at some of the leaders who are now facing corruption in court, it's not like they were born as criminals, or at some point they were very committed revolutionaries, but when they realized that, yeah, you can make money out of this thing, people change. And so the only way you can actually make sure that you have checks and balances and you contain wrong things is to build strong institutions. And in our case, unfortunately, we live in an open democracy, but we have a very weak opposition. And part of it, I think, has got something to do with the resources. But that's why I'm saying maybe the dynamics within the governing party may be something, if properly handled, may be something that is a positive for the country.
It's quite interesting talking about the dynamics in the ruling party, and you look at the turmoil that's happening there right now. With the leadership of the ANC suspending its Secretary General and vice versa, the Secretary General suspending the president of the country. And I'm not sure if we understood the implications and the ramifications of that, out of anger of personal protection and gratification. You just decide, okay, they are suspending me and I'm going to suspend the president of the country. Do these people realize the impact of some of these decisions, to how this country is going to be seen, by the international community that they respect so much? Because, the ANC government always does what it does to ensure, that it is always acceptable to the international community. So they respect the international community more than, they respect their own people. And whatever we do in this country, we try and ensure that, the international community is happy. And the fact that there are people without toilets, without roads, and without houses, it's a minor thing. And what do you make of the turmoil and this and its impact on society, on the country, and the forward movement of the country?
It's quite regrettable, to see what's happening there, because we've been reduced to almost like we are playing comedy or something. But the funny part about that development of the suspension of the Secretary General of the governing party was that he suspends the president, and then later on goes to apparently is filing court papers to challenge his suspension. And then when he's on the court papers, he's basically arguing that the resolution, the conference resolution that gave rise or that empowered the NEC of the ANC to suspend him is unconstitutional. But he uses the same resolution to suspend the president. So basically, on the face of it, I'm not a lawyer, but on the face of it, it looks like an irrational argument. And I suspect that many might be thrown out of court. But the bigger thing is not even about that. It's about the fact that the governing party takes the resolutions, not only that and of that particular one of stepping aside. There are so many resolutions that have been taken that do not get implemented, and they don't get implemented, and there is no consequences. In 2007, they took a resolution around free tertiary education. Our children are still toiling for free education. They took a resolution around the NHI, National Health Insurance. Still, nothing has happened. So the question is, it's not so much that, this is why sometimes the argument of these people who are saying these resolutions are being implemented selectively. Sometimes you can't dismiss them with a clear conscience, because you argue that there are many resolutions that could benefit the country that do not get implemented. And the sad thing is that currently, if you look at what's happening in Zondo, we've been subjected to Zondo for more than 2 years, scandal after scandal, revelations after revelations. But we are still yet to see an arrest arising from those revelations. More importantly, a conviction of somebody who, of the sort of evidence that we have. So when these things mount, you create a situation where people lose faith in public institutions, in just the fact that the country is in good hands, that we can uphold the rule of law, we can do the right things. So, and once we have that, unfortunately, as you're saying, people might begin to think that, you know, Black people are just incapable of governing. You know, of course, it's not true that Black people are incapable of governing. There are a lot of people who are very capable, but the sum total is that people are just going to say, no, but when apartheid was in charge, trains used to run from Naledi to Park Station. Now you guys who are in charge,
The trains are not running.
the trains are not running. The railway infrastructure has been looted.
So would it be fair to say, you know, the ruling party is, you know, they have just made themselves to be the enemies of the revolution?
But I think that the spotlight must fall back to us. You know, people say you get leaders that you deserve. It can't be. I mean, you can say whatever you want to say about them, but it's not like people don't see. It's, you know, because I mean, I don't understand why there is no connection between non-performance and the election outcome. I mean, I was hoping that there should be at least some kind of connection between the two. That if you don't perform, there must be. But there is no consequence. That's why I'm saying the decay has happened because people had so much faith in one organization, and to a point where, I mean, I like to make this example. There was a politician in Zimbabwe who was very arrogant, that Zimbabweans don't care about anybody else. All they care about is ZANU, and all we need to do is to tell. I mean, they were saying that whether you put a ZANU sticker on a donkey, and that donkey contests against an MDC candidate, the donkey will emerge victorious. So the point is that if the system does not punish non-performance, you can't blame those who are in power for not performing, because the system allows it. Yeah. So essentially, all of us as patriots, we should look at ourselves closely and say, but why is it that we are conspiring against the development of South Africa by not doing anything to stop the rot?
Yeah. No, thanks for that. And welcome, Bumi. And we in discussion on the South African democracy at the Crossroads, and Mpumelelo Mkhabela has just joined us, and I just want to welcome him appropriately. If you can just unmute and show us your face, we would appreciate. We are already in conversation with you know, Khathu, looking at the state of our nation, and I'd like to hear your views on these matters as soon as you are able to. If you are able to hear me. All right, whilst we're waiting for him, because he's been having some tech difficulties, and I'm hoping that he would be able to make some inputs into this conversation shortly. I just want him to unmute. He's here with us. Khathu, you really talking about you know, the implications of the Zondo Commission, and it's quite interesting that you know, I usually say this, that people have forgotten why the Zondo Commission was established. And to be precise, the Zondo Commission was established to continue the work of the Madonza public protector work, which you know, she was doing. Remember the report that she wrote about you know, about Zuma? It was largely about Zuma and the Guptas, and yet you know, to date we have been focused on, you know, just what they call the culture of the state, by all kinds of elements. And if you look across, hey, welcome.
Finally.
So you finally, yeah, no, I understand. So it's quite interesting and quite revealing that when that commission was established, by the way, it was established by Zuma himself. He is the one who decided that he is going to extend the terms of reference of the Zondo Commission. And if you look at the past 3 years, focus has been on the extended terms of reference and not so much on what the public protector has set out when she decided on the Zondo Commission. And here we are still to hear from the Guptas, we are still to hear from Zuma, who has been running away. But what it has managed to do is to reveal the rot within the ANC and the ruling party's activities in the misrule of the state and the misgovernance in the state. Welcome, Mpumelelo, and yeah, it's been a battle to get you connected, but you're here now. So I just want to maybe allow you to breathe a bit, and we are looking at the state of the nation and the turmoil within the ANC, and right now we're just looking at issues around the Zondo Commission, and I'll ask Khathu to comment on this, and then you can come in thereafter.
You're welcome to fire away.
No, if you're ready, take it away on the Zondo Commission. Okay, go for it.
Well, yeah, maybe let me just pick up from there. I just don't want to sound like I want Khathu to exhaust all his brain.
Yeah. Thanks for the rescue.
He pleaded with me to join precisely because he wanted support. So now I think, I heard what Khathu said in the last few minutes while I was trying to join about the implications of misgoverning the country, that it's bigger than one organization, it's bigger than the ANC, because there's a big issue here of Black people's pride at stake, and the whole scenario being created whereby we're being viewed as people that cannot govern. It's not an ANC issue. It's a question of Black people in general. And let me just say, to support that view, you must have seen what happened recently when Solidarity completed their university in Centurion. They completed building the structure.
Yes.
When after that completion of the thing, social media went completely ablaze about the fact that here is a small organization of Afrikaners. They were able to do something competently which the government could not do. And I could not help but really understand what that statement meant, because that statement speaks to what Khathu was talking about, that whatever happens in government, the failure to, for example, eradicate problematic school toilets or even building where none exist, the failure to do all of that is actually not a failure of the ANC. If you look at the bigger scheme of things, is being attributed to the failure of Black people to govern.
So, and that's another. Black people can't do anything, largely because of those who are governing, are misgoverning and are misruling the country on our behalf.
Indeed. And if a project fails in South Africa now, it's common cause. People are going to say, well, it must have been a BEE project. This bridge could not be completed because there must have been, it's a BEE thing.
Yes.
If a school is not finished, it's a BEE problem. If there's corruption, unless proven otherwise, it's automatically a Black person involved. If there's irregular state expenditure, the DG in that department inevitably must be a Black person. So it's only in instances where it has to be proven that actually white people are also involved in corruption that you actually say, okay, fine, oh, this is an exception. So it's very worrying, because Black people are not inherently incapable. The only problem we have really is that I believe that the capable Black people are not willing to put their hands up to be involved in state affairs. They shy away because they don't want to get involved in muddy stuff. So you have the weak and really very corruptible characters that are supposedly representing society, but they're not the representation of society. They represent society, but they're not the representation of society. So that's the problem.
So are you then saying to me that we no longer have, in the past when we were in struggle, we were talking about the likes of Khathu and yourselves as, these people who are prepared to die for the country. And what happened to that commitment of Black people being prepared to die for the country, being prepared to die for what is right? Why are we having, Black people shying away from responsibility about their own country, Khathu?
But simply, one of the things that we should not downplay, Bumi is right to say that a lot of people don't want to get themselves,
Andy.
blah, 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 blah. He's right. There's no doubt. But there's also gatekeeping, where we, even within the ANC, there, take a guy like Vusi Pikoli, a good lawyer, good advocate, committed to fighting corruption. Where is he now? So it's not so much about people not wanting, but even the system that we have now deliberately goes after the weakest amongst ourselves. Because you see, if you are going to have to get somebody to commit irregularities at the SABC, you can't appoint a CA to run that thing, because he will tell you, I've got a professional integrity to protect. But if you get someone who's struggling with matric and who knows that I'm here by favor and nothing else, it's easy to manipulate that person to do your bidding, whether it's right or wrong. So part of this thing is part of the structure. And unfortunately, we then destroy the institution and then turn around and say the state can't run a public broadcasting. Whereas there are other, the BBC is run by it's owned by the state, by the British government, but we don't complain that it's propaganda or whatever. So it's not true. You see, this is what we should separate. Mistakes that are being committed by the governing party should not exclude us, should not prevent us from entertaining an idea of having a strong state that is geared towards delivering quality service for the majority of our people.
Tell me, is it not a question of ideological orientation? Because if your ideology is not rooted in servicing your own people, it is not rooted in, cultivating the kind of life that you desire for your own people, but on some other things. We want to be equal. That's what the ANC talks about. It focuses on the Bill of Rights. We want to be equal with white people. We want to be, and that is why the tendency has always been wanting to protect the interests of white people more than servicing the people who were in struggle for liberation. Where is the problem?
Well, earlier on you said something.
Yeah, go for it.
Should I come in?
Yes, please.
Yes, earlier on you said something about what happened to that orientation of service to the nation when people were prepared to die. I want to mix what you're asking now with that question, because the struggle actually for freedom used to be a sifting mechanism on its own, because it required people of certain character. All Black people were oppressed, regardless of whether you thought you might have made money during apartheid, you were a businessman, you were successful, or you were a successful professional, but it doesn't matter. Generally, for as long as you were black, you were oppressed. However, not everyone joined the struggle for freedom, and it required people of certain character. So that in its own was a sifting mechanism. People who were prepared to sacrifice their lives to forego all the pleasures of life and be imprisoned on Robben Island, or to be exiled in their homes, or to be exiled outside of the country, or to be killed. They were prepared to do that. Now, the conditions of freedom do not have that sifting mechanism, because freedom, by its very nature, if it's not accompanied with strict measures, or who should occupy a public office, who should occupy this and that, the condition of freedom can easily allow any lunatic to put their hands up. In fact, what we have seen recently with some of the problems in the ANC is that people have used public office as an immunity protection mechanism. So I know that if I'm in trouble with the law, the best thing is to do is join a branch, quickly mobilize, be on the list, and then occupy a state institution. And if I can, use that to facilitate capture. And then the institution is captured, it's disabled, it can't arrest me, it can't prosecute me. If it does, eventually the system prosecutes me, I'll argue that no, this system has been hijacked by racists or reactionaries. So I use all of these political mechanisms to defeat the very same system that the freedom is supposed to have built. So there's abuse of freedom because there's no sifting mechanism. We don't know, we haven't figured out how best to get the right people in the right positions under conditions of freedom.
No, thanks to you. I'm in conversation with Khathu Mamaila and Mpumelelo Mkhabela. We are discussing South African democracy at the crossroads, giving us their own analysis and perspectives. You're more than welcome to join us on this platform through your comments on Facebook as well as on this platform. And if you have a comment to make or question to ask, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and they will respond to your questions. Mpumelelo, I just want to hear your views on the Zondo Commission, because, you know, I was talking to Khathu earlier and saying to him that it's been, 3 years now with the Zondo Commission in progressing, and the intention was really Zuma and the Guptas, and we haven't heard from those people. And we have been looking at malfeasance, and we have been looking at, the ANC against ANC, corruption of state institutions, ESCOM, and all these other state-owned companies. So all that is happening, and 3 years, no interim report, no arrests, and nothing. What do we expect from the Zondo Commission, and what do you make of what we are hearing and seeing, in line with what you just said now? That everybody has been about wanting to capture whatever institution that they can, not for the benefit of the country, but for their own interests, whether personal or otherwise.
Well, no big fish has been arrested, true, but we have to remember why the Zondo Commission was set up in the first place. It was set up precisely because the institutions that are supposed to do the arrest and prosecute had been captured. And even the evidence that was submitted to the public protector was so overwhelming that even she herself, she admitted in that report to say, there's no capacity in this office of the public protector to investigate the scale and the depth of this type of corruption. And we do the hawks were captured. In fact, before they were captured, they were first destabilized, because in their earlier incarnation, they were scorpions. And we now know why they had to be decapitated and transformed into the hawks, which were later then captured themselves and not able to do anything. The NPA was literally captured and nothing could happen there. So that's why we had Zondo in the first place. So I can understand the frustration that, listen here, we now have an idea of what went down. So we need arrest as soon as possible. But we forget that these institutions are still limping. They've hardly recovered. And they can't recover overnight.
So you say we may not even get, proper outcomes out of, spending the billions on the Zondo Commission because of that lack of capacity, on these institutions that are supposed to arrest. Because there's nothing in this country that says the police or the Hawks cannot do their work and cannot arrest those who are fingered by the Zondo Commission, and yet, they themselves need to be hauled, into that commission for their own misdemeanors. So where are we headed?
Well, the assumption now, we work on the assumption, it might be a wrong assumption, by the way, but we work on the assumption as society that Zondo, when he releases his report, is going to recommend a list of people who's supposed to be investigated and prosecuted by the state agencies. Number two, we work on the assumption that Zondo is going to make recommendations that are going to deal with the system, this political system that had allowed state capture to happen. If you look at the questions that he asked the former Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, and the questions he asked President Ramaphosa towards the end of his testimony, you can see that Zondo is searching for systemic answers to what he believes was a systemic problem. He's been asking the ANC, for example, when the president was there on behalf of the ANC, why is it that you did not act in parliament when the opposition parties were asking for an investigation on certain matters? And the president battled to deal with the question of party loyalty, party discipline, vis-a-vis individual conscience, people voting with their conscience in parliament to institute an investigation. So you can see that Zondo has been searching for answers there. Why is it that the party was not able to hold its own members or cabinet ministers to account? He asked Trevor Manuel the question, given your experience, minister in government, what do you think should be done to prevent such a thing? Manuel could not answer the question. He mumbled and mumbled. He really could not put together an answer. So Zondo, I think there's one level of criminal activity that is going to recommend something happens there. But I also expect him to come up with solutions. So is our political system structured in such a way that the state can be prevented or can be saved from capture or not? So that's the thing that he needs to come up with.
Yeah, that's true. I want us to take the conversation forward and look at COVID-19 a little bit. And if you look at what has been happening across, this thing of saying, the market forces determine the trajectory of society across the world, sometimes is really proven false by, some of the epidemics that arise. And if you look at the COVID-19 and what it has done to society, where I'm going with this is that if you look at our country, we tend to be wanting to depend so much on international community support on just about everything. We don't want to initiate anything. We don't want to do things for ourselves, and we want to be dependent. And COVID-19 has just thrown a curveball at us. You look at the vaccination, the vaccination program that's been running now. Americans are saying, well, Americans first, and the Indians are saying Indians first, the Chinese are saying Chinese first. And just about everybody who develops a vaccine, they want to ensure that their own nations are looked after and cared for before they can dispense of the vaccination to other countries. And yes, we do have a pharmaceutical company in South Africa, and a state-owned pharmaceutical company which has not been able to produce anything. And we have top pharmaceutical companies in the country that have not been able to produce anything. We depend on support from international community for vaccination. Are we ever going to find a cure and find things that we can do ourselves to look after our own people? What is at play here? Khathu?
No, I think there's no denying that we are victims of colonialism. We still have got this slave mentality. I mean, you know, there's so many things that we can talk about. You know, when Subramanian developed the car, the jewel car, you remember, we're supposed to develop this electric car and make it, commercialize it. We didn't do anything. We still look at the West. I mean, we are very proud that we make BMWs in South Africa. But all these are German companies, others are Japanese companies assembling Toyota and all that. I don't think we've got that national pride driving us to want to do things for ourselves. And even if you look at how we look at economic development, almost all the things that we do are geared at foreign investment. We never look at how we can unleash the potential of local manufacturers, local producers of things. No, I mean, so if you say, as you rightly say, if we have a state pharmaceutical company, why is it that we don't resource it properly? But you see, it goes back to the argument that I made earlier, that when you start by using the inability and the inefficiencies of the governing party to determine whether you can have capacity, then you will say, if these people can't run a basic thing like an airline, let's not complicate their life by imposing such complicated things as developing a vaccine. Let's just queue with other countries and beg to prioritize us and sign all those waivers. You know, these conditions that we want. If this vaccine have some problems, no, don't worry. We are not going to go after you legally. We're signing all these waivers. It's because we've almost accepted that we are incapable. You know, somebody was telling me that there are a lot of South African qualified nuclear scientists who are working in other countries because there's no space for them in our country. And when we finally decide that we're maybe going to do something, we're going to bring some foreigners. I mean, this is what Lucky Montana was telling us about how these locomotives were acquired. You can hear that there was no engagement of saying, don't we as South Africans have the capacity to develop this locomotive? No, it's not. We're not even interested. As long as we can identify some third party, and some of us are going to line to make sure that we're going to be the ones who are bidding with them, get our commission, make our money, that's it. It's a very sad thing, because instead of really thinking that what is it that we can do, because this thing of the vaccine is going to revolutionize a lot of economies. It's an opportunity to make millions of money, millions of rands or dollars in whatever currencies that you're talking about. But if you are only coming as somebody who's a buyer at the end of the value chain, obviously you're just going to be losing money and spending money to subsidize other economies. And this is the story of our lives, whether you look at whatever sector that you can think of, textile, car manufacturing, anything, cell phones that we are using, basically everything that we use, it's imported. And you do need somebody to say, no, this colonial architecture of the economy has to be done away with. You know, and unfortunately, these sort of engagements do not occupy us. Why? Our occupation is about the normal things that what can you do to ensure that those guys who are in power are less corrupt, and then we get somebody who's not as blatantly corrupt as the other one, so that it's tiring.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Quite interesting. Bumi, are we this incapacitated as a people that we can't do anything for ourselves? And I'm really worried about the post-COVID period, if ever there will be one, as to what kind of country are we going to have. Right now, for the last couple of months, we've been told that there is a vaccination program, and that vaccination program would have commenced, a couple of months prior to, the winter season and the third wave coming. And here we are entering the winter season, and the vaccination program has not commenced in essence. And, everybody knows that the third wave is coming and is here in a couple of weeks' time. What are we for?
Well, if I can pick up from your earlier question about why are we not able to do things ourselves in reference specifically to vaccines. I think what we are seeing about the so-called vaccine apartheid, someone was even referring to vaccine imperialism. I don't know what that means, but I think vaccine nationalism and vaccine apartheid and vaccine diplomacy are the new terms. But the reality of it all is that South Africa and many other developing countries have not invested enough in research and development in general, not just in the development of pharmaceutical products. In general, whether you talk about electric cars that Khathu is referring to, or you're talking about just general products that we can have intellectual property rights over. We are very weak in that regard. And specifically South Africa, if you go and look at the annual reports of the Department of Science and Technology over the last few years, you will note a very clear decline in investment in research and development. And at a time when other countries like the US, Germany, and China have been increasing. I mean, China spends a lot of money in research and development because they are trying to catch up with the US. The US has been accusing them of stealing intellectual property rights. If you invest in China, you are expected to share your know-how and your knowledge with the local Chinese, which they are then able to convert to use to the development of their own products. That's why we now have lots of cars made from China. So we don't have that kind of political muscle to demand that we want intellectual property rights of the car producers who are invested in South Africa. But when we have the opportunity, for example, in the case of the car that Khathu referred to, which once won an international award in Paris for being the best designed car. But there we had actually done well in research and development up to the point where we were now at the level of producing our own car. But if you read Musubudi Mangana's book, you will see that that project was tripped by ANC factional politics. So there we actually undermined our own capacity. So we have the capacity, but we then took away that capacity that we ourselves generated and subjected it to factional politics of the ANC. So because it was a Mbeki project, it had to die. So we still have to develop the capacity to say, listen, there are certain things that are of national importance that should be above party politics. It's a question of national pride. Anyone who messes it up, we must collectively agree that that person is the enemy of the nation. But we sometimes subject national interest to factional politics. That's what happened to that car.
Yeah, that's interesting. Nondobeko, you want to comment? And I see your hand is up. If you can just unmute and make your comment or question. Nondobeko, can you unmute and make your contribution? There you are.
Sorry about that. I think I accidentally raised my hand at that point. But anyway, I was still quite taken up by the conversations going on, because each of you, both Comrade Khathu and Mpumelelo, seem to be drawing from each other's points of view and really putting points across quite clearly to me. In any case, I think one of the points that Comrade Khathu made is that we need to change the architecture, he said, of the economy for us to be able to move forward. That was kind of a critical point for me. And I'm wondering, how do we go about doing that? Because we need to look at solutions, because we're talking about the problems that exist. And we know that historically they've been created through apartheid. We know they've been created with sellout negotiations. How do we break this? Your title says Crossroads. How do we break and find a way forward from the crossroads? I really would like to find some solutions, because otherwise we're just, talking and repeating the same issues that we know exist. We really need to find a way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ndobeko. Ndobeko is in London, in the UK, and would want to know from you, Mpumi, how do you solve the problem of this architecture of the economy?
I've got a few ideas here.
Yeah.
I think first of all, there has to be a realignment of what is in the national interest, and that it's something that should cut across political parties. I don't think you can say it's a project that one political party should take and run with. It should be an agreement across the nation among all political parties, all organizations, that we can say we all are agreed on what's in the national interest, first of all. And then the other things should follow, because think about it. Think about like the PRASA thing that Lucky Montana was talking about. The government has got regulations about local content, that certain percentage should be reserved for local content. And that's where you would expect that some rail industry is going to develop from the ground in this country, run by South Africans, producing rail products that can be used for both PRASA and Transnet. And then what happened, because there's no agreement on what constitutes the national interest, what happens then, some guys form a BEE company, and then they work with some Spanish guys. They tick the box in terms of the BEE requirements, because they're a South African company owned by Black people. They take a stake in this Spanish company, and then they create a vehicle through which they can bid. Suddenly, in that way, the local content disappears. The trains are still imported from Spain, and the local content requirement is either crushed or subdued. The reason why that is so easy is because the people that are involved in that whole system have no sense of what's in the national interest. You take a Transnet locomotives, which is a different one, where again, there's a requirement for local content, but people are paid to give away that local content, basically give away the national interest requirements, so that they can then give this thing to China South Rail, all of it, and then they pay commissions to some foreigners from India, and then our guys, they get cash in bags, and they buy vaults, and they keep cash in their house. They don't even use their salaries, some of them. The reason why all of that is happening, because there's no sense of what's in the national interest. So we must develop a program that cut across all politics, and I'm now talking about going forward. Develop a program of what constitutes the national interest, and what are the elements of the national interest. Of course, the key element of what's in the national interest should be the development of Black people that have previously been underdeveloped deliberately. But if it's done properly, even the people that were previously the slave masters or the beneficiaries of apartheid in South Africa can actually benefit from something like that, because as things stand at the moment, they too stand to lose, which is why they invested heavily in CR17, not because they wanted to help Khathu or me or help you. They invested in CR17 precisely because they thought, look, this country is going down, and then our interests are also going down. So the best thing to do is to invest where the other people invested and counter that investment. And they did, they succeeded. But the question is, we don't know what are the implications of that type of politics going forward. So it may well be that those people that are powerful, they themselves can subdue what I think is in the national interest. So we need to take back the national interest, which has now been privatized, and bring it back to the public domain through a series of programs. I mean, how that can be done, I mean, is a challenge for the likes of AZAPO to convert that into a political program, but I don't expect it to be an AZAPO issue only. All political parties must have this national interest question.
You know,
Just-
it's-
Just to add to on what Mpumi is saying, you are spot on, Mpumi. But just to add on what you're saying, I think we must also move the spotlight from politicians to the voters. For as long as we vote, we give the political aristocracy a blank check. We should not expect anything, because as it is now, there is no relationship between non-performance and the outcome of the elections. And so to influence, I mean, we don't even have to have a new program. We have the National Development Plan. If we were to do that thing alone can revolutionize the economy of South Africa. But no, we just developed it, put it somewhere, and we're not moving on it, because, as you're saying, people who are at the top there are just basically looking after their own selfish interests. And
yeah.
and there's no consequences for that misgoverning of our country.
You know, the biggest issue for me has always been, you know, who has to take the baton for the development of this national interest? Because, I mean, if you look at, you know, the whole concept of Black industrialization, you know, BE was largely pushed so with the desire to push Black industrialization and in an effort to support what you call national interest. And if you look at it, it has never been about the national interest. It has always been about the interest of a few individuals. You look at, for instance, what is happening now with the whole energy sector. People wanting to introduce, you know, green energy and alternative energy sources. It's a whole dynamic of industrialization altogether. It's a whole new value chain. And, you know, the question that everybody is asking, what is in it for us? Not for us as individuals. And we want to develop a program that would benefit us as individuals. And so that we can then partner with these multinationals who have the capacity, who have the skills. We really need to look at the question of who should take the baton. And maybe it is what Khathu is saying, you know, conscientize the majority to, you know, take that responsibility, because you cannot just give it to political parties. It belongs to the nation, because if it is of national interest, and then the nation should really take responsibility for it. I just want us to move. I see we are running out of time. Quickly, Vali Musa is you know, charged with the responsibility of reconfiguring the electoral reform. What should we expect out of this? How are the politics going to be reconfigured going forward? Is it likely that, you know, voters are going to vote directly for a president? And looking at the fact that you know, Cyril Ramaphosa spent 300 million just to become the president of the ANC, and so he is a bought president. Are we likely to see a bought presidents of the country going forward? Because those who have capital are going to fund Mpumelelo Mkhabela because they want him to be president, and so that he can then do the bidding for those who have funded him. What are we in for?
Well, I doubt whether we can at this stage reverse quickly the commercialization of political power, because it has become apparent that those who are not in public office, they acquire their political power by funding their preferred candidates. And we will see now, because part of the reforms now that have taken place is the disclosure of party political funding. Of course, it will drive the funding underground. People won't disclose, but they will still fund. But I mean, others might still disclose, and we will see to what extent are people prepared to show that they're actually funding political parties or funding certain candidates. However, I think the other issue of direct representation, as in like candidates standing outside political parties, what we should look forward to is how much of the percentage of parliament's seats will be allocated to individuals vis-a-vis political parties. I think that's the debate, because the judgment by the Concord says that we must respect the requirements in the Constitution that says every individual has a right to vote and has a right to stand for public office, which was really the anchor of the reforms that we're seeing now. So the question is, how much will those individuals be allocated 50% of the 400 seats in the National Assembly? And then when that happens, how will the country be carved into that constituency for the 200 seats? And the next question is, because if the individuals have a right to stand, will there be a mechanism in Parliament for a situation where an individual can then also be allowed to stand as president? And will the equal opportunity be created for an individual on his own vis-a-vis an individual backed by a political party, so that there's equal chance for any one of them to be president of the country? So those are the questions that I think have to be answered in these reforms, and political parties obviously have to gear themselves to a new environment.
Khathu, I don't know what your views are on this. Remember, this electoral system that is prevailing in the country was supposed to be a temporary thing. It was really meant for 1994, largely because of the multiplicity of issues that were prevailing at the time, and it's been kind of permanent since then. And some are saying these electoral reforms are long overdue, and we need to move towards constituency-based representation. Is it something that this country desires, really?
No, there are a lot of things that are temporal. For example, when we came up with the idea of provinces, we're trying to address the Inkatha problem issue of
exactly
federal state because of that. But now we have provinces as a permanent feature in our country, and I don't think that they'll go away. But when you look at our country and think around constituency-based politics, on paper it looks attractive, but in reality it may just wipe all political parties, and you may political parties, because very few. South Africa is a very vast country, and very few organizations will be able to win constituencies, unless, of course, if by some divine intervention, the ANC breaks up and you've got basically two organizations in one. But currently, you may just have entrenched the ANC hegemony. And whether that's desirable or not is probably up for debate. The other thing, which is a bit attractive about this direct representation, is that you have ordinary people voting directly for a candidate. Because if, for example, you looked at a compromise candidate, if you go back to my story about the donkey, if a party puts a donkey as a candidate, as a presidential candidate, we won't vote for the donkey if we are not voting for the party. The donkey will lose. But it means that parties will be more careful as to who they put as a presidential candidate, because then that person must also have integrity, enjoy confidence of ordinary voters. But the problem as well, again, of this person who's directly voted for by the public is that there are very limited mechanisms of holding him to account. Because unlike in a party structure, where if we think there's a political program that we say we are pursuing, there are disciplinary issues, but if you are on your own, you may just end up becoming very alone to yourself. What are the checks and balances? So I don't think they are perfect systems. But what is obvious now is that what we have is not desirable. We can't have a situation where effectively you have about 3,000 to 4,000 members of the ANC who go to their conference as delegates, basically voting for the president of South Africa, because that's what you have. You go there, which is why you have to raise a lot of resources to ensure that you get that thing right there, because you know that once that person is the president of the ruling party, by extension, now we're just talking about youth cabinet and stuff. And that's not democratic. You can't have a situation where we have 55 million voters. No, population, maybe the voters probably are 30 million, but you only have got about 40 million, 44,000 people deciding for the 30 million people. That's not democratic.
No, that's great. And is somebody wanting to make a comment? Can you make your comment, please, or question? AZAPO News EC. I don't know who you are.
I'm not sure. Probably this could be me, comrade.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the issue of this, what Mkhabela spoke about on national interests cutting across political lines.
Yes.
You see, because I don't think there's anything like national interest cutting across political lines, in my view, in a neoliberal parliamentary political system, particularly within the context of a capitalist setup. Because you see, you are talking of a structured society where, you know, class interests supersede national interests. So you cannot say political. I don't think it's possible to have national interest in that context, as he puts it, that political parties will therefore not have their own programs as to how they see what national interests are in a class society. We are classes, so those intra-class contradictions or intra-class conflicts come into play. They cannot just be excluded and say we're a structured society, so much that class interests supersede national interests. This is the setup. There's no homogeneity where you say, for instance, AZAPO should be the same as ANC. We have always been divided. Like there are those who joined the struggle, there are those who did not join. He correctly said so. But they joined that because their interests or personal, whatever their interests are, as a group or as individuals, supersede what you call national interests. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Mpumi, you want to respond to that?
Well, I think I disagree. I think it's possible that as a people, as a country, we can formulate what we call it's in our national interest. Already, the constitution of the country, imperfect as it might be, it does have some minimum level of what one might call it's the national interest. People might criticize it there and there. It can't accommodate everything, but there are certain things that are very basic that could be of national interest. But the constitution is a very broad framework. So we need to work out practical programs that are on the national, like for example, take industrialization. I am sure it doesn't matter whether you're white, black, poor, or rich. I'm sure we can have some agreement that we need to develop South African industries on specific issues. We spoke about COVID earlier. I am sure the DA and the AZAPO and the ANC and the PAC and the ACTP cannot disagree if we say we need to invest in research and development so that we can have homegrown vaccines on a range of diseases, not just COVID. And we have to have these things developed by South Africans, using all kinds of expertise that they may find. Some of it may be global, maybe wherever, but in the end, whatever they formulate, we can call it a South African product. That's how nations progress. If you look at this research and development that has been happening in the US, Russia, and China, it has enabled these countries to quickly have a turnaround on development of vaccines. It didn't happen out of a vacuum. They already had a very well-developed infrastructure of research and development. They just repurposed it to suit this pandemic that we have at the moment. So we just need to develop those things. I don't think there's a disagreement about that. Of course, there has to be disagreement against people who, when the government says there's national content of 40% or 30% or whatever, someone decides to privatize that to foreigners sitting somewhere in China and then take a commission to privatize that. I mean, surely there must be, I'm sure that what I'm talking about cut across parties. And that's why when it happens, it must offend everyone across parties, everyone must be offended. All citizens must be offended that the country's potential was privatized for corrupt short-term gain.
Look, I mean, all of us are way in struggle and continue to be in struggle for national interest. So there is no doubt about, the fact that there are issues that cut across, people whose interest is in the advancement of society. So there will always be national interest. Talking about national interest, I'm interested in your views, gentlemen, on, we talk about nationhood, as part of national interests. We want to develop our own nationhood as a country, as a society, society of Black people. This country belongs to Black people. We've always said that. And yet we see, I'm not too sure if it is in the national interest that we see the promotion of ethnicism, or ethnic nationhoods that seem to have been prevalent in the last couple of weeks and days, with the installation of Misuzulu as the king of the Zulus, and we have also been listening to discussions and issues about the Princess Masalanabo of the Mujaji of the Gulubetu people, and is that part of the national interest we're talking about? And is it something that, our society should be promoting right now? I don't know, 66 million rand was given to that kingdom of Misuzulu for him to continue doing the kind of things that his father was doing. Is that really part of the national interest that we are talking about? Or are we dividing this country again, along, ethnic lines, in line with what, the apartheid system was Mpumi?
Well, I think as part of building the nation, you can't avoid the idea of people's cultural rights being asserted in the context of nationhood. By nationhood, I'm not referring to narrow ethnic nationhood.
Yeah.
I'm referring to South Africa as a nation as a whole. So there are elements in that nation that involve certain cultural groups or certain people of historical background who are united by language, culture, and in some instances united by the geography of where they stay, and the evolution of their cultural group or linguistic group. So I don't think you can build a nation by discarding those elements in broader society. I think the issue that people are crying out for, if you look at, in the case of the Zulu nation, for example, every time there's a budget of what do they call the royal house, every time the budget is unveiled, there's always an outcry.
It's the royal house.
The Zulu kingdom is the only one with that privilege. I think there has to be, there can be a debate about how to have equality among all the traditional kingdoms we have had in this country, without necessarily breaking up the country into ethnic fiefdoms or anything of that sort. I think there are different dynamics with these different groupings. I mean, if you look at the Royal Bafokeng, for example, they don't necessarily receive a lot of money from government, but they're a wealthy nation by virtue of the geography, the geographical area they occupied, which happens to be blessed with the mineral resources, platinum and all of that. And they're able to generate wealth for that population and use that to give bursaries for development of the Bafokeng and broader people who come from the northwest part of the country. So different groups occupy different geographic areas. However, South Africa has long, in my opinion, detribalized with the advent of industrialization, which pulled together people from all kinds of regions and gathered them in Barberton, first of all, and gathered them in Kimberley, and gathered them eventually in Witwatersrand, which is now Johannesburg. All of that led to kind of like a gradual detribalization. So it will be difficult to bring back the old fiefdoms. In any event, the Zulu nation has also stopped building up in the way it was building up under Shaka, who was conquering the different tribes. No tribe can be conquered now anymore. So, and
You know,
you would not have,
my interest is, no, continue.
and you would not have a large group of cultural grouping being moved away because it's fighting another grouping. So I think what needs to happen is that people must stop accentuating or exaggerating ethnic issues and realize that whatever ethnic group or cultural group you come from, what comes first is the nation of South Africa as a whole. And then you as a cultural group, you belong in that nation.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I understand that, but my basic issue here, Comrade Khathu, is the fact of having a nation within a nation. What should we be supporting?
No.
Should we be supporting,
I-
a black nation, or have nations that are mushrooming or that are being supported over, the broader nation?
I've got a concern around why you can actually elevate a tribe and call it a nation, because I would imagine that what we're supposed to have, is a South African nation, and within that nation there are various tribes. But I think the loose usage of the word nation in relation to a particular tribe is problematic. But what is also even bigger of a problem is what Mpumi was raising, that the allocation of resources seem to not to be equitable, and that's a problem. But beyond that, I think without necessarily, because you see, culturalists and traditionalists will want to preserve these things as part of the African heritage, and probably an organization like AZAPO will have serious ideological challenges around how do you, on the one hand, remain a custodian of cultural values of Black people, and maybe looking at a situation where, for example, personally, I don't believe that anybody is born to rule over other people. I just don't. I find that concept problematic. That you have this hereditary system where people are born and rule other people. I think that's why we have democracy. I think they've got a role that can be defined in the constitution, but one of the biggest challenge, for example, if you look at the arrangement in KZN, where you have, you remember Khalima Mutlante went and did some research around land ownership there. And there was this Ngonyama Trust, and as he was establishing his report, the biggest people that were going to benefit from his recommendation, obviously ordinary Zulu-speaking people. And they said, no, they were okay with the land being owned by the king. But you ask yourself, don't you want to have title deed? Don't you want to be empowered? So do you want to remain subjects of the king? But I suppose it's a more complicated discussion. But for me, we need to find a balance, because it's not just about the money that we're allocating to traditional leaders. What is their role? What is the role that they are playing in real terms? Because you now have got municipal councils throughout the country, and so if we're allocating money, at least we should be able to be accountable. What is it that this money is being used for? Because otherwise, then you're going to have, one of the reasons why people, I think, want that kind of power is that they know that it's a means to access resources. But I think just giving, because I think that particular budget was secured as part of the compromise in 1994 when we were trying to ensure that IFP stroke that tribe was basically given an incentive to participate in the election, because they were saying if we don't have a special arrangement for King Goodwill's Zulu, you may not have an election in the first place. You remember the march on ANC offices in Johannesburg that resulted in the death of so many people, the violence in KZN and on the reef. But now that maybe there's a bit of peace, maybe we should allow that discussion to to take all these facts, because I personally I think there are certain things that we can't justify. If we're spending 66 million on one kingdom, and then there's a Balobedu Mujaji kingdom where my ancestors come from, we're probably going to say, why is it that they're only getting 2 million? And you know, and
Yeah.
vice versa. So I just think that there's a level of engagement that is required. But we must also run away from this thing of saying Zulu nation. I don't think it's helpful to have a nation within a nation.
Yeah. It is a Zulu tribe indeed. I understand we were focusing on, you know, South African democracy and related issues, but I just want to maybe two questions on, you know, some international news and something that is happening internationally, and just to prick your thoughts. You know, just across the border, Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, decided that he's going to extend the term of office of Chief Justice Luke Malaba. And that was, you know, taken to court, and the court overturned that. You know, there was a law, you know, for a long time, there was a period where, you know, the people of Zimbabwe were basically saying President Mnangagwa is a law unto himself, and he has, you know, taken the justice system and put it in his pocket, and he is now in charge. So can we really say you know, the decision by the High Court of Zimbabwe to basically retire Chief Justice Malaba is a victory for the people, or is it a victory from Mnangagwa? Because I think, you know, he's just proved to the people of Zimbabwe that you know, the justice system is not in his pocket. It is actually independent, even though he has created a problem himself. Did he create the problem to prove to people that, you know, the judiciary is independent, or was he really wanting to extend the term of office of the Chief Justice unconstitutionally? What are your thoughts on this?
I think he wanted to actually extend the term, and he would not have done so without consulting the Chief Justice himself. And I think it is actually a victory for what one might call, I wouldn't say victory for democracy in Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwean democracy is subdued at the moment. But
Yeah.
I think if at all, this gives an indication that there may be some life there. The judiciary itself had been subject of political machinations for a while. Its independence was undermined and subdued, and I'm not sure whether this is a sign that it's recovering. So there's one way to look at it, like it's a victory in a sense that at least there's a sense that the judiciary can still be independent on critical matters, even if it means objecting to the will of the president. And the other way of looking at it is that, well, this very same judiciary itself, even though it's not independent, even though its independence was undermined, but however, when it comes to issues that touches home, because this is about, if this term of this Chief Justice is extended, it basically means it's a denial of opportunity of another judge who might be sitting there. So
I hear you.
when they realize that undermining the judiciary also affects them, they actually do rise to the occasion. But we had this judgment is not unprecedented. We had a judgment like that here in South Africa. You remember when Zuma tried to extend the term of Justice Ngobo illegally.
Oh yeah.
And then there was a complaint, and then you had a whole constitutional court sitting, except Ngobo himself, where they overturned the decision by Zuma, and basically ruling against a decision that would have favored their colleague. He was still there at the time; he had not retired. So it's not the first time. And not long ago, we had judges in Malawi who stood their ground and actually authorized the elections that had taken place, despite attempts by the outgoing president who wanted to steal the election. They stood their ground. He tried to threaten them, but they stood their ground. So I think these judgments, the three of them, the South African one, the Zimbabwean one, and the Malawi one, it's an indication that Well, the judiciary, if it's tested, it can stand its ground.
That's an interesting one. Khathu, you know, the one thing I really want to check with you, you know, this decision which was taken by the British in 1917 that, you know, the Jews can just have Palestine, you know, as their own land, you know, through some declaration. And ever since then, you know, the Palestinians have been bombarded, killed, and subjected to all kinds of repression. And the international community is just watching. Everybody is watching as though nothing wrong is happening. You know, what are we likely to see coming out of the situation? I mean, Al Jazeera was complaining only last night that you know, their offices were bombarded, and you know, the buildings that are occupied by civilians in the Gaza Strip are being mowed down by the Jews. You know, what should we make of this?
Unfortunately, when we say the international community, we're basically talking about the US and Britain, and they are not just watching, they're actually behind Israel, supporting actively that terrorism visited on the Palestinian people. It's actually very, very unfortunate what's happening there. And if you look closely at the politics of Israel at the moment, the sitting head of state is facing a corruption charge. So when you want to divert attention from your political things, unlike here where we talk about step aside, there they do big things. To divert attention around this situation, you just have to whip emotions around security issues of the Israeli population. Then all those forces unite behind the president, the prime minister, rather, that's what they call it. But you see, there can never be peace there for as long. I mean, it's very obvious. I mean, we have a clear situation of occupation of Palestinian territory by Israel. So that struggle will continue for as long as that occupation persists. And unfortunately, some people have decided to sort of like find very complicated things. Everybody you speak to will tell you, yeah, that's a very complicated matter. It's not complicated at all. It's a matter of occupation of Palestine by Israel, and they don't want to allow the Palestinian people a right to self-determination. And when those people engage in a struggle for their own freedom and the right to self-determination, we call them all sorts of names. They're terrorists, they're suicide bombers, and we vilify them, which is what was happening in our case when we were fighting against apartheid. We were terrorists as well in the eyes of the international community. Even now, if you were trained by any of the liberation movement, you still cannot access the US because you are still perceived to be a terrorist. But all I'm saying, the bigger problem though is that I don't think there's a visionary leadership that is sufficient in Israel to see that their own peace is dependent on justice for the Palestinian people.
No, thank you. I just want to check. Now we've been talking for 2 hours, and we were dissecting whether, you know, our democracy is at the crossroads, and if we are, which path should we be taking as a nation going forward? As your closing comments, Mpumelelo.
Well, I think we do have some. We do have a framework in the Constitution. As I always say, I always qualify that it's not 100% perfect, but it provides nevertheless a framework on which we can build. And I think the issue of the national interest, we really need to debate it and think about it. And I think it has to come across in a form of a very democratized national interest, where people take initiatives on their own. You can't put all your basket in the hands of the state, because when it's captured, then you're dead. So I think you need those initiatives driven by individuals, driven by organizations, you need also to have a lot of pockets of alternative authority, or even alternative ways in which people can see how political power can be used, and as a good example. And that cannot always be the state doing that, even though the state obviously is the biggest stakeholder. Everyone wants to have a hand and direct it properly. But we should accept that the organizations, churches, trade unions, civil society groupings, they can also form alternative sources of authority and do initiatives constructively and demonstrate that actually they can provide leadership on a lot of issues that are affecting the country where the state is not there.
Sure, Khathu, where to from here?
Kwame tells us that the job of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious. And I think we should heighten that conscientization of our people. You know, if you have a conscious voter, your democracy is safe.
No, thank you, comrades, and it's been a good 2 hours well spent, I think, and I really enjoyed the interaction with the two of you. And it's always great to spend time with citizen journalists, because they always have views about what happens in society, rightly or wrongly, and we always listen to them and accept and criticize their views. So it's been great, and thank you very much for spending the afternoon with us, and we look forward to the next Sunday. Next Sunday, we'll be focusing on African politics. We are dealing with the African liberation issues, the African Liberation Day, and we will be having Professor Trimble from the United States, focusing on African politics. And thank you very much for spending the time with us, and we look forward to the next weekend. Thank you and goodbye.
Ooh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Listen, the struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed.